news of the unexpected death of Stanley Kubrick arrived, there was a sense of shock in the film world, where Kubrick was generally considered a grand master. Here he is directing The Shining, which he began filming in 1978.
But don't look at your hands, Danny. Don't look at your hands when you come around. Keep it low. Come on. Slowly, slowly, slowly. Keep coming.
When he died last March, he had just finished work on Eyes Wide Shut, which would be his last film, and he left a legacy of other movies that have survived the test of time to become familiar classics. After some early work, his career really took off with The Killing in 1957, the story of a racetrack robbery.
Get your hands up, all of you. Now, one move out of any one of you, and I'm going to start firing.
Then came Paths of Glory with Kirk Douglas as a World War I French officer who loses his faith in the cause.
I apologize, sir, for not telling you sooner that you're a degenerate, sadistic old man. And you can go to hell before I apologize to you now or ever again.
My Stanley Kubrick film on video is his superb 1957 anti-war masterpiece, Paths of Glory, starring Kirk Douglas in the story of French soldiers in World War I sent on a suicide mission just so some general might get an extra star. The troops' position is hopeless as Douglas leads them into massive German artillery fire. Later, after the troops have rebelled and are court-martialed for doing it and are scheduled to be executed, Kirk Douglas is stunned at their fate.
Well, you see, Colonel, troops are like children. Just as a child wants his father to be firm, troops crave discipline.
I see.
And one way to maintain discipline is to shoot a man now and then.
May I ask, do you sincerely believe all the things you've just said?
That was Adolphe Menjou as the general. Paths of Glory is a near-perfect film, masterfully directed and quite shocking for its time, I think, in the rawness of its language. It's 30 years old. It seems so fresh, so very fresh when you see it now. In the wild contradictions expressed by its officers, it's a great companion piece to see along with Full Metal Jacket and Dr. Strangelove. When it comes to films about war and warriors, Stanley Kubrick is a master.
He knows what he's doing. Spartacus, an epic that Kubrick said he didn't like, but audiences did.
It's Laurence Olivier as an evil Roman tyrant confronting Kirk Douglas, the leader of a slave revolt, in a scene from Spartacus from 1960. And along with Lawrence of Arabia, Spartacus is considered a thinking man's epic film, the story of a Roman slave played by Douglas who wants freedom for his brothers in bondage. This film had been chopped by censors before its original release. Some of its original negatives were destroyed, but now it has been lovingly restored to its original length by the same experts who saved Lawrence of Arabia. And when I first saw this movie at age 14, I liked the battle scenes more than the love story. Seeing it now as a 45-year-old, just the opposite reaction, preferring the genuinely romantic scenes between Kirk Douglas and Gene Simmons as the slave who loves him.
Why don't you kiss me? This is the first time I was ever going to have a baby.
Composer Alex North has contributed a sweet melody for their love affair. Also most entertaining, Peter Ustinov, an Oscar winner for his supporting performance as the droll, conniving slave dealer who buys Spartacus.
Oh, 11 miles through this disastrous heat. And the cost of hiring an escort. Ruinous.
The battle scenes as Spartacus leaves the slaves against the Roman army are justifiably famous. Director Stanley Kubrick, then just 31 years old, displaying here an eye for spectacle. One controversial scene that was cut from the original release of the movie and is now restored is the infamous oysters and snails scene with the bisexual Roman nobleman Crassus, Laurence Olivier, inquiring about the sexual preferences of a slave played by Tony Curtis. Because Olivier is dead, Anthony Hopkins from Silence of the Lambs dubbed Olivier's voice in this scene.
Do you eat oysters?
When I have them, master.
Do you eat snails?
No, master.
Do you consider the eating of oysters to be moral and the eating of snails to be immoral?
No, master.
Of course not. It is all a matter of taste, isn't it?
Spartacus does hold up upon second viewing, and in comparison with today's movies, with scenes like that, it seems so much more adult, with mature actors playing fully grown men and women with wit and passion and ideas, and sometimes even a world-weary attitude toward life. Today, it seems we're watching mostly boys and girls, and I do recommend strongly seeing Spartacus again. Didn't that impress you?
I liked it. I think it's a good epic, but not a great epic. It's not up there with Lawrence of Arabia.
No, I don't
I'll tell you what, I liked Olivier, I liked Kirk Douglas, I liked Charles Lawton, and I really enjoyed Peter Ustinov, who steals the movie just as he did 30 years ago. Every one of his scenes is a little jewel. The thing that I really liked, I think admired the most about this movie that you wouldn't find today is it doesn't end in total victory for Spartacus. It ends with the victory of his idea that slavery is wrong, and that's a bittersweet ending, and it's all the audience is going to get instead of the triumphant hero in a very simple-minded victory.
I think there's another thing. With the age, it seems, I'd have to go back and check it, but the age of the players and the way they carry themselves seems to be so much more adult than today. Today it would be cast with young, you know, young, vigorous, Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, battle of death and that sort of thing, and it would seem more of a kid show than an adult show.
I was happy to see it again. The controversial Lolita with James Mason in love with a nymphette.
I don't want you around them. They're nasty-minded boys.
This version of Lolita is lightweight, in my opinion, introducing and then teasing its scandalous subject matter only to end abruptly. Unfortunately for its director, Adrian Lyne, his film is going to be compared with the work of one of the true masters of the cinema, Stanley Kubrick, whose own brilliant version of Lolita was released back in 1962. This version of Lolita is more straightforward, clinical, and less disturbing. I guess pedestrian is the word I'm looking for. Adrian Lyne's Lolita will open theatrically next week in Los Angeles and will air on Showtime beginning August 2nd. Rent the Kubrick version is my recommendation. I saw it 6 days ago, and it was fantastic.
Kubrick's Lolita is not one of his best films, and this film, although I think it also falls short of the novel, I think makes a more sincere effort to be true to Nabokov's vision than Kubrick does. Kubrick, I think, pulls away from the subject matter and tries to displace it into a more acceptable arena. This movie is absolutely about the subject of sexual obsession as it goes both ways between these two people, and I think that it is probably not correct to say it ends abruptly. I think it ends where it has to end, with this revelation about Lolita's true feelings, and I think that that reveals the real subject of the novel, which is how men are absolutely controlled by their own delusions about themselves and about their romances.
I remember something that Louis Malle told me when he made Pretty Baby, a film that touches into the same area. And Mr. Malle said that, he said, you know, I think young girls know everything. He said, and then they spend the rest of their lives being taught to forget it.
Well, Lolita knows a lot more than Humbert Humperdinck does in this movie and in the novel, that's for sure.
All right, but what I'm saying is, Mal's idea that he expressed to me is provocative and rich. This film doesn't come close to touching any of that.
Oh, I think it does touch it. I don't think it's a successful film, but I think it is a very sincere film, and I think it's a more faithful adaptation, actually.
Well, the Kubrick film is haunting, in my opinion. This film is not.
The classic black comedy Dr. Strangelove with Peter Sellers in 3 roles and George C. Scott as a gum-chewing general.
The bomb, Dimitri. The hydrogen bomb.
Is Dr. Strangelove, the 1963 film that remains one of the benchmarks of modern movie history, a film so outrageous in its portrayal of nuclear war that even today it's quoted and referred to as an example of a whole mindset. Here's Sterling Hayden as the paranoid General Jack D. Ripper.
I can no longer sit back and allow communist infiltration, communist indoctrination, communist subversion, and the international communist conspiracy to sap and impurify all of our precious bodily fluids.
And who could ever forget the movie's shocking climax with bomber pilot Slim Pickens actually riding an H-bomb down to its target? I looked at the Laserdisc version of Dr. Strangelove the other night, and I was struck all over again by how daring and how modern this movie is. I think you could make a good cause that Strangelove is one of the few movies that really has been influential in our times by its portrayal of a Cold War mindset that is so rigid and so bureaucratic that it has no interest in the human realities of war.
Roger, I think I've often called it my favorite film of all time. It's the one I'd love to see as much as any film ever made, and I think that just to comment on what we're talking about in Full Metal Jacket, I think when you start to compare against that greatness, I think that's influencing you. I think Full Metal Jacket is very strong.
In other words, you don't think it's as good as Dr. Strangelove?
I think probably no films are.
30 years is a generation, and so maybe a whole new generation of filmgoers needs to be introduced to the greatness of Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, the 1964 Cold War satire about America's nuclear defense system run amok. And when I'm asked to name my all-time favorite movie, not necessarily the greatest movie of all time, but just my personal favorite movie, this is the one I pick. And it's been restored by Kubrick, and it's glorious. With the great Peter Sellers in a triple role, first as a British officer Mandrake confronting a renegade American general, Jack D. Ripper, played by Sterling Hayden, who has ordered a first-strike nuclear attack on Russia.
I'm afraid, sir, I was asked for the key and the recall code. Have you got them handy, sir?
I told you to take it easy, Group Captain. There's nothing anybody can do about this thing now. I'm the only person who knows the three-letter code group.
The order to attack naturally triggers a crisis in the Pentagon's war room where the president, Merkin Muffley, also played by Peter Sellers, tries to placate the Russian premier kiss-off in a classic phone call.
Well, let me finish, Dmitri. Let me finish, Dmitri. Well, listen, how do you think I feel about it? Can you imagine how I feel about it, Dmitri? Why do you think I'm calling you? Just to say hello? Of course I like to speak to you. Of course I like to say hello.
Lurking in the shadows is Sellers' third character, the demented German theorist Dr. Strangelove, who relishes the prospect of a nuclear holocaust so he can build a race of supermen with lots of women around.
Of course, it would be absolutely vital that our top government and military men be included to foster and impart the required principles of leadership and tradition.
Fabulous. The movie today seems as fresh and as pointed as when it was first released, when I saw it as a college kid. Technology run amok, bureaucracy run amok, and Peter Sellers at the center of it all. A great film, lovingly restored. You must catch it at theaters, especially if you haven't seen it before.
Oh, it's a wonderful film, and it's not dated. It's
not
fresh. It could play today. It could have come out today.
Right.
And we were talking earlier about that great set in the vampire movie.
Yeah.
Here is another movie with another great set, The War Room.
Ken Adam is the set designer.
The way that war room, that circle of light, and that map showing those bombers going toward Russia, the way that plays is so much of an underpinning to the effect of the entire movie, and then just one funny performance after another. How many movies, after 30 years, have given us two catchphrases? Precious bodily fluids and perverts. Preverts. How did I get that wrong?
I want to see a lot of movies. There's a little movie theater there. And we've had some of our friends offer to send us movies, and I love to watch movies.
We love to watch movies too, Mr. President, and when we saw you saying that on NBC News, we decided that, of course, it was our duty as citizens and film critics to suggest some movies we think you, your family, and guests would enjoy screening in that convenient White House theater.
And first of all, it is great to have a movie fan in the White House, and this is probably a game a lot of people can play. What films would you want the president and his guests to screen? Roger and I each made our own independent choices, each for reasons we're going to explain, and the first two revolve around the very presidential issue of leadership gone wrong. My choice, and it's an obvious, but I think it's a great one, Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. One of my favorite scenes, as Russia is under threat of nuclear attack from the United States, occurs in the Pentagon War Room as a fight breaks out between the Russian ambassador Sadetsky, played by Peter Bull, and the gung-ho American General Buck Turgidson, played by George C. Scott.
Oh, the war must sing for it. Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
That's one of the greatest lines of dialogue in any film. Now, of course, President Clinton has seen this film. But I'm sure that if he were to see it again in the White House with the Joint Chiefs of Staff sitting around him, I'm sure it would take on a real immediacy, because among the many, many comic points this film makes is that technology has a way of dominating its creators. Build it, and they will come to use it. I also hope that the White House staff invests in a Laserdisc machine, so if they don't see this film on 35mm, I hope that the president and his guests can see Strangelove in the great new disc that Stanley Kubrick himself has supervised. This film has never looked better than at home. And Roger, I will buy the White House a Laserdisc machine if it is not in the American budget.
I think that's very generous of you, Gene.
But it's a great disc that Kubrick did.
I would pay half of it, but I can see it's something you want to do for yourself, so I won't get involved.
We'll go 50-50.
Yes. The scene I thought you were going to show is the one where the president has to get on the phone to the head of the Russian government and say, we made a little mistake. There are some missiles coming your way. Okay.
And one of the hilarious war room monologues in his 1964 classic, Dr. Strangelove. Here's the situation. The United States has mistakenly launched its arsenal of B-52 bombers at the Soviet Union. At first, it seems there's no way to get them back, and it's up to the timid American president, Merkin Muffley, played by Peter Sellers, to call the Russian premier and explain, whoops, what happened? Here's Peter Sellers at his best.
One of our base commanders, he had a sort of, well, he went a little funny in the head. You know, just a little funny. And he went and did a silly thing. Well, I'll tell you what he did. He ordered his planes to attack your country.
That scene makes me laugh and think at the same time. There have been a lot of famous phone call scenes in the movies, none better than that. And when I see that scene and laugh out loud every time, I also realize how much I miss Peter Sellers, one of our greatest comic talents, dead now, almost 12 years.
Why do you think I'm calling you? Just to say hello? Of course I like to speak to you. Of course I like to say hello. Not now, but any time, Dmitri. I'm just calling up to tell you something terrible has happened.
The visionary 2001 A Space Odyssey, generally considered one of the best films of the century,
is undoubtedly the single greatest outer space film ever made. It's Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. He made it between 1966 and 1968 for $10 million, the most money ever spent then on a science fiction film, at least up to that time. It's hard to describe, really, the impact of 2001. We really hadn't ever seen anything like it before. The story took us back to the dawn of man, with apes, our predecessors, discovering how to use primitive tools, all the way up to the year 2001, with man using more sophisticated tools, spaceships, to try and unlock the mysteries of the universe. A lot of people say they have trouble getting the meaning or message of 2001, but I think you can get simply enough out of the picture by experiencing the majesty of spaceflight, the feeling of longing for another world, of venturing into and encountering the unknown. It's the single best vision of space ever to come out of the movies. In fact, don't take my word for it. Get this. A couple of months ago, I happened to be flying to Cincinnati. I was seated next to Neil Armstrong, the astronaut, the first man to walk on the moon. Armstrong told me that of all the space movies, he liked 2001 the best, that it did a remarkable job of communicating what living and traveling through outer space is actually like. What a remarkable, impressive compliment for a great movie.
That must be the best review that Stanley Kubrick ever got for 2001. And you know, of all the people in the world, if they were sitting next to Neil Armstrong, they would ask him what it was like to walk on the moon. It took you to ask him what he thought about 2001. But I think I know what you were getting at, because the amazing thing about 2001, which is now more than 12 years old, is that it is fixed forever in my imagination, I think in the imaginations of a lot of people who have seen it, what we think outer space looks like. Now, there are a lot of places we've never been. I've never been to Australia, I've never been to the South Pole, and I've never been to outer space, but I think I know what all of those places look like because of the movies I've seen. And 2001 by Kubrick establishes a standard of excellence. Before that, you could get away with a lot of schlock in science fiction movies, but after that, remarkable special effects achievement. The picture was fixed in our minds of outer space, the stars, the surface of the moon, in such a way that any other movie after that was going to have to spend at least as much money and have at least as much know-how in order to match that vision.
And there was another standard that 2001 set, and I think that is for its intellectual content. I think that you can debate what that little slab that the astronauts find means. You can debate that all you want. One thing you can't debate is the intellectual, emotional thrust of the picture, which is going out there, moving on, mankind moving on, this need, this desire, and properly so, to find out what is beyond, to increase our intelligence. That's all in 2001. What a rich experience it is to think about and to feel viscerally that kind of desire to move on through the world. I think that's the essence of science fiction films. We want to be put out there. We want to travel and see things we haven't seen before.
And that was a movie that was, so in other words, it was really great at both areas that science fiction is involved in, the hardware and also the ideas, the vision. Right.
Our video pick this week focuses on one of the greatest films of all time, Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. Now, from March the 10th to 15th, the University of Illinois at Urbana will hold a Cyberfest to celebrate one of the movie's key anniversaries.
I am a HAL 9000 computer. I became operational at the HAL plant in Urbana, Illinois on the 12th of January, 1992.
HAL's birthday is an occasion for a week-long festival devoted to 2001 and the subject of artificial intelligence. To prepare for Cyberfest, I called Arthur C. Clarke, the author of the original story and screenplay, at his home in Sri Lanka. Well, you know, 2001 is certainly the best science fiction movie ever made, and as you probably know, it was voted one of the greatest 10 films of all time in that poll that's taken every 10 years by Sight and Sound magazine in London. It's considered one of the top 10 films of all time, but so many other science fiction films have not followed that lead. There has not been a film since 2001 with the same kind of vision or ambition.
Of course, 2001 killed science fiction films for about a decade, until the technology caught up with it, and then we had, Star Wars and so forth, which are, I guess space westerns. Great fun. I enjoy them, but you're perhaps right in saying that no one has ever attempted to follow the lead created by 2001.
The whole third act of 2001 is such a visionary leap into the unknown. How did you get away with that, you and Kubrick, in making a film with an ending that is so poetic and provocative and unconventional?
Stanley deserves all the credit for that. I just gave him some ideas and inputs, and the credit goes to Stanley and his amazing special effects team led by Douglas Trumbull and Wally Beavers.
The Star Child, the last shot in the film as the Star Child, or at least 2001 fans now call it the Star Child. I don't know if that was really what you called it, but the Star Child turns and looks at the audience. What is the Star Child asking is, and how can we respond?
I would say that the implication is that the future is wide open. It's up to us what we do about it. Our destiny is, at least to some extent, under our own control. But of course, at the time, a lot of people didn't get it. And one of the remarks I remember hearing after the premiere was from a senior MGM executive saying despairingly, "Well, that's the end of Stanley Kubrick."
But it sure wasn't. The original reviews were generally negative, but audiences came and stayed, and today, 2001, A Space Odyssey, is seen more than ever as one of the great visionary films of modern times.
The drama of the moment I'm about to show you is as dramatic, I will submit, as any in the history of film. Again, I go to Stanley Kubrick, and to the critical moment in his 2001, A Space Odyssey, from 1968, in which, in the greatest jump cut in movie history, a primitive man's weapon, a bone, becomes another weapon, a satellite carrying bombs. I think the proper response to that scene has always been, wow. And in that scene, I think Kubrick cuts across human history so that 1,000,000 years from now, someone writing about the history of the Earth would include both that bone and that satellite as significant events and cut out a whole lot that's gone on in between. That's humbling. That's wow.
I'm not sure, though, that it's drama, because it seems to me that drama involves dialogue and people. I mean, that would have been my assumption in choosing for this category. Maybe you've kind of stretched the category a little bit.
But, Roger, I thought of drama as an emotional moment. There wasn't somebody knocking somebody out or something like that in action, or a chase. I mean, you know that sequence. You probably remember where you were when you first saw that.
I sure do. I was in the theater.
The film that exploded my mind about what a film could be came a year after college. In 1968, Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. In terms of sound and images and story construction, this film is a groundbreaker. I treasure two moments. First, the end of the key opening sequence, the dawn of man sequence, when the apes discover that a bone is a tool that can have many uses. And then comes one of the greatest edits in the history of the cinema. That's a great political and sociological statement done in a classic visual. And for sheer drama, who can forget the film's final shot before the intermission? That's how the film was first shown, with an intermission, when we find out before the American astronauts do that the HAL 9000 computer can think for itself and is eavesdropping on their conversation about it.
Well, as far as I know, no 9,000 computers have been disconnected.
Well, no 9,000 computers ever fouled up before.
That's not what I mean. Well, I'm not so sure what he'd think about it.
I think the film embodies the essence of Stanley Kubrick's films, all of them, the duality of man for creation and for destruction. And you can see it in A Clockwork Orange, going farther back, Paths of Glory, most recently in his Vietnam film, Full Metal Jacket. And when I saw 2001 in 1968, well, it didn't make me want to be a movie critic. I was thinking of being a lawyer at the time. But it certainly opened my eyes to the potential of film as film.
And you know, the problem is, just looking at those scenes again right now.
Yes.
20 years later, there are no directors working with that kind of vision. Not even Kubrick, really. Nobody who wants to redefine what a movie is and redefine what a movie can do. All of the so-called giants in Hollywood today are so trapped in narrative, you'd think they were back in the 30s or the 40s again. Tell a story. Get the right star. Get the right chemistry between two stars. There are no stars in this movie, and there's no chemistry. There's just such an enormous vision that when you sit there, you're just transfixed as you look up at the screen.
I want to tell you a sad story. I was once asked, what movie prop would I most like to have? I said, the monolith in 2001. I talked to Stanley Kubrick about getting it. You know what he told me?
What?
Doesn't exist. MGM in London threw it away for storage space. None of the props. All gone.
It really is too bad, because Ted Turner owns MGM now, so if he had the monolith, he could probably colorize it pink and use it as a desk.
Now we have a couple of recommendations involving the promise and threat of technology. And my choice, well, you've just seen a famous scene from it, Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, another film for the president and his White House screening room. And you know, if he's reelected, Bill Clinton actually could be president in the year 2001, albeit only for the first 19 days. The movie is a meditation in 4 short stories about how mankind has and may evolve through technological leaps forward. Now, what I propose is that the president look at this film, I'm sure he's seen it before, this time with the eyes of an explorer. He is the captain of the ship of state. Of course he's seen 2001, but never with the opportunity to be inspired by it and act on that inspiration. The film's ending also offers a real choice for the president. Doing things the old way, does he want to end up as an old, sclerotic old man in a fancy room? Or does he aspire to the rebirth as a star baby? I know he has never inhaled, but I would like to see our president get high naturally by simply screening 2001 all alone in a dark room. And then maybe with the head of NASA or the Surgeon General with him. Dream the big dream, gentlemen, and this is a film that inspires you to dream.
Clockwork Orange, about a future society where mind control does battle with violence.
One example of a movie that has achieved cult video status, we're told, is Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, made in 1971, 4 years before Rocky Horror. Kubrick's film, and I think it's one of his greatest, is a mind-bending journey into the ultra-violent near future, anticipating a punk revolution where violent kids run wild in the streets, and in this scene, in their own private clubs. Malcolm McDowell plays the music-loving leader of the pack.
And it was like, for a moment, oh my brothers, some great bird had flown into the milk bar, and I felt all the melanky little hairs on my plot standing endwise, and the shivers crawling up like slow melanky lizards, and then down again, because I knew what she sang. It was a bit from the Glorious Ninth by Ludwig van.
What happens in this film is McDowell is captured by the police and treated with visual shock therapy, seeing a whole bunch of violent images, sort of like what we go through, Roger, when we see the Friday the 13th series. And the result is a pacified, dehumanized Malcolm McDowell. Now, is this what we want as a society? Is this the future we're going to get, whether we want it or not? A Clockwork Orange deals with those individual versus society issues, and it does so with unforgettable images. In fact, and I think this is key, there's some of the same punk images that we see today.
You know, I looked at the film again on video only last night, and one of the most amazing things to me was the opening sequence where Malcolm McDowell and his friends are running wild through the city with their clubs, beating up on people and things, and I was reminded of the opening shots of Sid and Nancy, the punk rock movie that came out this year, in which the Sex Pistols, Sid Vicious, is doing exactly the same thing. Another thing I felt last night, you know, when this movie came out, I had a lot of reservations about it.
I know you did.
They were based upon the fact that I felt it had all head and no heart. And I still feel that way about the film, that this is a cerebral exercise, not an emotional exercise. But the sad thing is, in the last 15 years, violence in our society has become so pervasive, so much more so even than in 1971, that by now I was able, in looking at the film, or maybe because I'm older, I was able to share some of Kubrick's own detachment more than the first time I saw it.
This is a visionary film. It can be viewed as simply a cool thing, a punk thing, but I think that the power of this film for adults to rent is that it is visionary and as current as it was in 1971.
And of course, nobody ever questioned Kubrick's filmmaking. He's a great director.
The next performance that Oscar overlooked really astounds me. It's one of the finest performances of the 70s, Malcolm McDowell and Stanley Kubrick's film, A Clockwork Orange. It's about a society of the future trying to control violence. McDowell plays a futuristic street punk who enjoys kicking the stuffing out of old men and roughing up women. Now, what's remarkable about McDowell in A Clockwork Orange is his range of emotion, from a domineering gang leader to a whimpering, brainwashed victim of mind control. First, we see him as the gang leader beating his buddies into submission. From power demonstrated to power implied. That's what's coming up here now. After slashing his buddies, gang leader McDowell now takes quiet control of his henchmen. Watch McDowell's face here. It almost becomes a menacing death mask.
Well, now we're back to where we were. Yes? Just like before and all forgotten? Right. Right.
After some painful brain conditioning, McDowell's personality is transformed. He returns home from prison only to find that his parents have taken in another son to replace him. McDowell would normally get angry, but he's been programmed to get sick whenever he feels a violent urge coming on.
How do you do, Joe? Find the room comfortable, do you? No complaints?
I've heard about you. I know what you've done. Breaking the hearts of your poor, grieving parents. So you're back, eh? You're back to make life a misery for your lovely parents once more, is that it? Well, over my dead corpse you will, because you see they've let me be more like a son to them than like a lodger.
Joe, don't go fighting here, boys.
A terrific performance, but I think I know why this performance was ignored by Oscar. In any film by Stanley Kubrick, pictures like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Barry Lyndon, it's the film and Kubrick's direction of it, not the actor, that is the star. McDowell was overshadowed by Kubrick, the director, and Oscar, in the process, ended up ignoring an impressive piece of acting.
You know, you're absolutely right, and it's true of critics, too, with a director like Kubrick who controls every aspect of his film totally from beginning to end. We say, Stanley Kubrick's 2001. Think quick. Who starred in it? A little hard to remember, isn't it?
Gary Lockwood?
And Keir Dullea, right, but we were just thinking of it. You think of it as a Kubrick film. The only other director like that I can think of is Alfred Hitchcock, who was so much in control of the whole production that even though he uses some of Hollywood's top stars, they don't necessarily win their Oscar nominations for Hitchcock film. People think of, oh, that was Hitchcock's film. That wasn't Cary Grant, or that wasn't Ingrid Bergman.
You're right. One of the things that McDowell does in the film is so well is simply survive it. He's got a lot to do in the picture. He stomps on people. He gets stomped on himself. He almost is drowned in one sequence. It's a remarkable physical piece of acting. He's in virtually every scene a superior performance.
Barry Lyndon, based on Thackeray's novel about a petty little man who lives against the backdrop of tumultuous times in Europe.
Cock your pistols. Gentlemen.
The Shining, with Jack Nicholson slowly going mad during a long snowbound winter.
Damn soul. Just a glass of beer. Hi, Lloyd.
And Full Metal Jacket, which begins with basic training and then takes his characters to Vietnam. Our next preview trailer is for Full Metal Jacket, the new Vietnam film by Stanley Kubrick, who is generally considered to be one of the greatest living directors and certainly one of the great perfectionists among filmmakers. Kubrick makes his films in complete secrecy. He shot this Vietnam movie entirely on sound stages in England, and he supervises every aspect of its release, and that includes personally directing his trailers. So this coming attraction trailer is not by an ad agency, not by marketing experts, it's by Stanley Kubrick himself.
The enemy has very deceitfully taken advantage of the Tet ceasefire to launch an offensive all over the country. In Saigon, the United States Embassy has been overrun by suicide squads. Khe Sanh is standing by to be overrun. We also have reports that a division of NVA has occupied all of the city of Hue south of the Perfume River. In strategic terms, Charlie's cut the country in half. The civilian press are about to wet their pants, and we've heard even Cronkite's going to say the war is now unwinnable.
Sir, does this mean that Anne Margaret's not coming?
Whose side are you on, son?
Our side, sir.
Don't you love your country?
Yes, sir.
Then how about getting with the program? Why don't you jump on the team and come on in for the big win?
Yes, sir.
Son, all I've ever asked of my Marines is to obey my orders as they would the word of God. We are here to help the Vietnamese because inside every gook is an American trying to get out. It's a hardball world, son. We've got to keep our heads until this peace craze blows over.
Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket.
Looking at Full Metal Jacket, I had a couple of very strong impressions. To begin with, it looks like the film is apparently a comedy.
Yeah.
A sardonic, satirical black comedy in the tradition of Kubrick's masterpiece, Dr. Strangelove. Now, I didn't know that until I saw this trailer. If you'd asked me, I would have guessed this movie was a drama.
Yep.
In the second place, this is a very strong piece of filmmaking. It plays on its own as an effective short film. It somehow gives me confidence that this is going to be a good movie, and it made me curious to see it. So this trailer did its job.
Oh, it did its job beautifully. First of all, it starts out very solemnly about Vietnam, and I think, boy, is this going to be better than Platoon? I don't know. It's Kubrick. It's going to be better than Platoon. Then it starts to have some funny stuff in there. I said, oh, my God, he's really going to make fun or have fun with Vietnam.
Yeah,
he had fun with blowing up the world in Strangelove. It was brilliant. This could be brilliant, too. Let me see the picture.
Well, I guess if a customer is sitting there saying, let me see the picture, the trailer has worked. Coming up next, few films have been more eagerly awaited this summer than Full Metal Jacket, the Vietnam epic by Stanley Kubrick, and few films, I'm afraid, will be more disappointing. This isn't a bad film, but it's not a great film, and in the recent history of movies about Vietnam, Full Metal Jacket is too little and too late. It invites comparison with Platoon, and I'm afraid it suffers by that comparison. The movie tells the story of a group of infantrymen from basic training right through to a fatal firefight with an enemy sniper, and of course there's no way we can see that story and not be reminded of Platoon, which is a stronger and more confident movie. Full Metal Jacket stars Lee Ermey as a tough, profane Marine drill instructor who is so single-minded in his devotion to the Corps that he's actually capable of making a speech like this.
Anybody know who Lee Harvey Oswald was? Private Snowball.
Sir, he shot Kennedy, sir.
That's right. And do you know how far away he was?
Sir, it was pretty far.
from that book suppository building, sir.
All right, knock it off. 250 feet. He was 250 feet away and shooting at a moving target. Oswald got off 3 rounds with an old Italian bolt-action rifle in only 6 seconds and scored 2 hits, including a headshot. Do any of you people know where these individuals learned how to shoot? Private Joker.
Sir, in the Marines, sir!
In the Marines, outstanding. Those individuals showed what one motivated Marine and his rifle can do.
That haunting face belongs to one of the recruits who's just about to go over the edge. Once they're in Vietnam, one of the other Marines is assigned duty as a journalist and learns the propaganda ropes.
Search and destroy. We have a new directive from MAF on this. In the future, in place of search and destroy, substitute the phrase sweep and clear. Sweep and clear. Got it?
Got it. Very catchy.
That's Matthew Modine as the would-be journalist there. A lot of the second half of the film was given over to a firefight in the city of Hue, where snipers pinned down the Americans while cameramen filmed the story for the evening news.
You, John Wayne? Is this me? Hey, start the cameras. This is Vietnam, the movie. Yeah, Joker can be John Wayne. I'll be a horse. C.H.G. Rock can be a rock.
I'll be Aunt Margaret. Animal Mother can be a rabid buffalo. I'll be General Custer. We'll be the Indians. Hey, we'll let the Gooks play the Indians.
Some of those scenes, especially the first 2, might make you think that Full Metal Jacket resembles the dark irony of Stanley Kubrick's classic 1963 anti-war film, Dr. Strangelove. But you'd only be about half right. There is irony in this movie and satire and comedy, but there is also way too much routine war footage. The opening scenes in basic training recycle material we've seen before, all except for a brilliant performance by Vincent D'Onofrio as a pudgy weakling who the Marines turn into a psychopath. That was him we saw looking up at the camera in that earlier scene. And there is more recycling at the end of the film, which is devoted to that firefight in the ruins of a burning city, a sequence that was shot on a giant set and looks like it and reminded me more of World War II war movies than of the Special War in Vietnam. We expect an original masterpiece from Stanley Kubrick every time out, and this time I'm afraid it's not a bad movie, but it's not original and it's not a masterpiece.
Oh, I think it's very original and very close to being a masterpiece. I mean, first of all, I think that the stuff that we see, the training sequences, are absolutely startling. Even though this is familiar material, I think that image that we got of that guy is explosive, and I'll never forget it. Second, the fighting here is a different kind of fighting than in Platoon. It's city fighting, and it looks different, and it's a whole different war, and he's playing this film, I think, at a whole nother level. Platoon was about embracing the soldier and giving the soldier credit for this crazy world that he was in. This fighting, to me, is about the mixture of joy in fighting and the absolute fear of being killed, in the sense of when there's this guy called Animal who charges, I was so excited for him. And it's the guy I'm supposed to hate. And then when I see a sniper go on an American and Kubrick has his camera push in, I feel for the first time people getting attacked. I think visually this is the strongest movie I've seen in a long time.
First of all, I didn't think it was that visually exciting except for a few specific shots that were really great. But secondly, let's talk about that very sequence you're talking about. One of the guy's friends is wounded and he's out there under fire, and the other one says, I'm going to go get him, and he runs out blasting with his machine gun to try to rescue him. Then later, the others come up behind, and we can clearly see where the sniper is. Then when you get to that reverse shot and he pushes in, that is a cliche, Gene. I mean, when I saw that push, I was so disappointed in Kubrick. This whole sequence is taken right out of absolutely routine grade B Republic World War II war movies of guys running out there to try to save their buddy and somebody else shooting at them.
I have never felt a kill in a movie quite like that, ever, in any Vietnam film.
Not in Apocalypse Now, not in The Deer Hunter?
Not like that. Not like that.
Well, then in that case, you're going to love The Late Show, because they have kills like that every night in black and white, starring John Wayne, starting about midnight.
But they don't have movies like this film, Full Metal Jacket.
I disagree, and I disagree particularly about the part that you like.
Well, that's just one scene. I like the whole film. It's full of great scenes. Full Metal Jacket.
But you know, the real buried subject here is our disagreement about Full Metal Jacket, and I would be very surprised if you like that movie in 30 years as much as you like this one today. I don't think it's going to hold up that well. It's not one of his great films.
In the world of films as made today, Full Metal Jacket is a film to recommend. Full Metal Jacket is a very, very fine film.
My opinion is the Full Metal Jacket is not Kubrick at the top of his form, which we've just seen here.
Roger, it is not as good as those two films, which are among the greatest films ever made. But for you on this show to give thumbs down to Full Metal Jacket, I think is a gross mistake. I think it is a film worth seeing.
I think I'm trying to put the movie in a context, and I'm trying to tell people that it is not as good.
And this is the show where you give Benji the Hunted a positive review.
It's 90 minutes long, only has about 100 words of dialogue. It's about a dog in the wilderness, beautiful photography, those cute little cougar cubs, which you mentioned, the magnificence of the other animals, the adventures, the little kittens crossing the stream, the very shot you pointed out. This movie is a movie that kids would really enjoy.
No, you know what they should see? Roger, my rebuttal of this film is you're wrapping yourself in the flag of children, and I'm saying go see the Black Stallion instead. There's a film with little dialogue, so much better.
I'm not wrapping myself in the flag of children. You're wrapping yourself in the flag of the sophisticated film critic who's seen it all.
No, boredom with Benji running.
I don't think that any child is going to be bored by this movie, and indeed, I found the nature photography to be very interesting myself. Now, Gene, that's totally unfair because you realize that these reviews are relative. Benji the Hunted is not 1/3 the film, 1/10 the film that the Kubrick film is, but you know that the same thing happens, that you review films within context. So it's not fair for you to compare those two reviews, and you know it, and you should be ashamed of yourself. And what's amazing about all those films is that they don't get old. I mean, his films really seem to exist in our memories, and the images remain sharp even after all these years. He's a master of style, a perfectionist, a man who never made a movie casually or just for box office gain. There died in England last Sunday one of the great free spirits of the movies, Stanley Kubrick. For the last 35 years, since the success of Dr. Strangelove, he marched to the sound of his own drum, making the movies he wanted to make, the way he wanted to make them, in his own good time. He made at least 4 films that are generally considered masterpieces, and one at least that will live as long as people project images onto screens. That one would be 2001: A Space Odyssey, the great visionary 1968 film about Man the Toolmaker, which begins with the first tool using apes, and then continues with the tools that would allow us to escape even the planet of our birth. Another of his widely hailed works is A Clockwork Orange, a film I've never admired as much as most people do. Its images have entered into the general imagination, though, especially Malcolm McDowell as a violent vandal being brainwashed into harmlessness.
You proved to me that all this ultra-violence and killing is wrong and terribly wrong.
And, of course, Dr. Strangelove is among the great sardonic screen comedies. Said at the height of the Cold War, it made dark comedy out of the possibility of nuclear war. Kubrick's other great anti-war film was Paths of Glory in 1957, with Kirk Douglas as a French lawyer who finds himself commanding an infantry regiment in the brutal trench warfare of World War I. Stanley Kubrick was one of a kind, a towering figure who made films almost by hand, burnishing every detail like a loving craftsman. At the time of his death, he had just finished the erotic thriller Eyes Wide Shut with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. It opens this summer.
You know, one of the things people forget about Kubrick is that he made these movies, the very early ones like The Killing, were real close to the ground thrillers that had a lot of emotional weight to them and were film art in not a heavy, portentous way. And Matt, you think back to the movie we talked about earlier, Lock, Stock, Two Smoking Barrels, it probably lifts a lot from this movie about an elaborate racetrack theft that doesn't quite work out.
You know, in a way, in the late 40s, with movies like Fear and Desire, which he kind of suppressed, and The Killing, he was sort of like the Scorsese of that time. He financed those movies himself. He made them real close to the ground, like you said. He was operating outside the studio system at a time when that simply wasn't done, and he has always operated completely as a lone wolf.
He's a real independent, too, and he's really changed the face of movie history. I mean, one of the things about Clockwork Orange, a movie that actually has a great performance, Malcolm McDowell, maybe the last great performance in a Kubrick film, basically ended adult movies in this country because newspapers stopped taking ads because that movie is so controversial and violent and combined violence and sex in an unusual way, I think.
Okay, well, now let's turn to Kubrick's final film, Eyes Wide Shut, which stars Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman as a wealthy Manhattan doctor and his wife. They lead a comfortable life that seems happy enough, but unfilled needs are boiling away beneath the surface, and one night, stoned on pot, they get into an argument.
You've never been jealous about me, have you?
No, I haven't.
And why haven't you ever been jealous about me?
Well, I don't know, Alice. Maybe because you're my wife. Maybe because you're the mother of my child, and I know you would never be unfaithful to me.
Their argument escalates. She inflames him with her sexual fantasies, and he leaves the house and enters on an odyssey that takes him into a sexual underworld, to a secret private orgy that an old friend tells him about.
Remove your clothes.
Please.
Remove your clothes. Or would you like us to do it for you?
After he returns at dawn from the orgy, he finds his wife in the middle of a nightmare, and she describes it to him.
But that's not the end, is it?
No.
Why don't you tell me the rest of it?
One of the film's best qualities is the way it gives screen time and weight to the supporting performances. Watch the way here that Sidney Pollack dominates this scene as a rich man who asked the doctor to look after a date who has overdosed.
I can't thank you enough for this. You,
Oh, I'm glad I was here.
And Bill, I probably... Oh, I know I don't have to mention this, but this is just between us, okay?
Eyes Wide Shut plays almost like a dream odyssey through a series of erotically charged scenes. All five of us will be back to discuss what we think about it after this.
My number 4 film is Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick's last, which was released in July of 1999. And it stars Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman as a happily married couple who realize, thanks to a conversation that begins very casually, just how fragile the bond between them actually is. This sets Cruise's character off on a real odyssey. The key stop in his journey is a Long Island mansion where a bizarre secret ceremony is underway. I think a lot of people were looking at Eyes Wide Shut from the wrong angle. It's not to be taken literally. It's Manhattan as you'd experience it in a dream, where everything feels familiar, but very strange. And I think Eyes Wide Shut is a profound film about love, sex, and trust in a marriage, about learning to take things day by day and either accepting or ignoring whatever unpleasant truths come along. It's also a film I cherish because it puts you in the authoritative hands of an old master with a style that flies in the face of every modern convention.
It does. And you know, people put it up to this test of reality as if that means anything.
I know.
I got email from people saying, well, you could see that there was an English sign in the window of one of the stores, or it wasn't really shot in, there's no street in Manhattan that's that narrow, or it doesn't have any traffic. Of course there isn't. You know, I've got news for them. Rear Window wasn't shot in a real city either. I mean, the whole point is that you elevate the material with your style into something special. Otherwise, just go out and visit New York if that's what you want to see.
Exactly. And there are all kinds of clues in the film as to that, in a way, because you really take a journey inside Tom Cruise's mind, in a way, in this wonderful sense of sexuality and guilt and unpleasant discoveries and the journey the marriage has to take, all building up to the last line, which is a beauty.
Yes, it is. Welcome back to the special program devoted to a discussion of Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick's final film. It's a long film, 159 minutes, but Kubrick makes it spellbinding right up until the end, which, however, resolves things a little bit too conventionally for my taste. Instead of sending the Cruise character on a sexual odyssey, which is kind of what we expected from the advanced rumors, it sends him on a voyeuristic journey. He visits, he sees, he talks, he witnesses, but somehow he never quite gets involved. Everything in the film, the saturated sideshow colors, the edgy music, the costumes, the ritual, it all adds up to a nightmare vision of a man whose jealousy takes him right up to the edge. I think this is a very good film. Michael, what do you think?
Well, I'd be a little more extreme, I guess. I think it's one of Kubrick's best works. And one of the reasons I think that is because I looked at most of them to do a long piece on them. I'd rank it among his 4 or 5, and 4 or 5 best.
Dan, what did you think about Eyes Wide Shut?
It has something very, very important, I think, to say about intimacy and honesty in marriage or any relationship. I mean, you have Nicole Kidman, who's very open with her fantasies of what she thinks about sex and her needs. Tom Cruise is her husband. He's not only not being honest with her, he's in self-denial about his own fantasies and needs. And so this creates the disequilibrium that sets the story in motion. So the rest of the movie is a very giant convoluted plot to get Cruise to the point where he can be back to equilibrium with his wife. I mean, that's the whole journey, this whole odyssey of the film. I have never seen anything quite like this. Still, on the same token, it's a Kubrick film, and it has all the Kubrick trappings. So it's kind of a maddening mix, wonderful images, but detached drama. You know, if you can get by that, I think it's a fine film.
Jonathan?
Well, I was had the advantage and the disadvantage of having read Arthur Schnitzler's novella, Traum Nouvelle, before I saw the film, and was amazed at how close an adaptation it is. I'm really eager to see this film again because I had some trouble getting used to Tom Cruise in relation to this. He seems to be kind of a caricature. He seemed to be a thinner character than the others, whereas I thought Nicole Kidman and Sidney Pollack were both quite extraordinary.
Ray Pride?
I think that Cruise's journey through nighttime New York is kind of an illustration of the very common question, what are you thinking? And he probably shouldn't have asked, because the things that he's going to discover in these adventures are things he probably never imagined he would see. And in a way, because of its dreamy form, like he's always interrupted when he thinks he's about to discover something. It's like a dream, it's like coitus interruptus, interruptus. Because of that dreamy form, it becomes kind of a masterpiece of sexual intimacy in the sense that people get so close to each other, but when you reach a certain distance, you don't get inside them, you get beyond them. And it's infuriating in one's own dreams, but here it's pretty hypnotic.
Well, the thing is, though, I thought Cruise was fine in the film, and I think he helps it to a degree because I think he is a figure whom the audience does kind of fixate on. He's one of those movie stars.
In a way, he's more powerful than Kubrick. I mean, you know, people are going to be going to see this film probably more often because of Tom Cruise and because of...
But that's not necessarily bad because Cruise did lend his power to it, and I think it's used in his movie star persona is used in a kind of interesting way. I was very surprised that I thought Cruise was a little bit more successful not a little bit, that he was more successful as a Kubrick protagonist than Jack Nicholson in The Shining, who's one of my very all-time favorite actors, but who I don't think leads you into the maze quite as effectively.
Well, one of the things that works, because it's Tom Cruise, is that everyone in the film relates to him sexually. Even the drunks on the street who try a little gay bashing. Every single character in this movie looks at him in a particular way. We kept hearing it was going to be an adult film. It was going to be a really steamy film, and I think a lot of people expected it to get the NC-17 rating. But I was talking the other day to Terry Simmel, the chairman of Warner Brothers, who simply said, we're not in the business of NC-17. And that both he and Kubrick, he said, wanted an R rating for this film. And Jan Harlan, the executive producer of the film, and Tom Cruise both told me that Kubrick himself approved of the idea of using these digital figures who stand between us and the action, kind of the Austin Powers shot, where you can't quite see what's going on behind them. And as a result, we have these 65 seconds in the middle of the film that are not quite as Kubrick would have preferred in a different world.
Well, what's infuriating in a way is that, you know, if there had been an axe murder in that scene, it would have gotten an R rating with the blessings of the MPAA. Yeah. And that's what, I mean, it just seems like such a strange sense of priorities.
The galling thing about it is, Roger, that if you took the film that Kubrick originally envisioned without the digital stuff, you could put it on late-night HBO as is right now, and we can't get that version released in theaters around the country.
But the real tragedy is these digital smudges are preventing us from having the same revelation as the character. He's been fantasizing about things that his wife may have done or that she might do with another man, and suddenly he's confronted with the fleshy reality of all these things.
So movies like Happiness, for example, were released without a rating at all, and this movie could have been released unrated, except Warner Brothers wasn't willing to do that. And so we get really a fairly minor change in the movie, and we still get the idea, but it just seems like it's galling.
It's 65 seconds, not a big deal, but here's something else. It aesthetically doesn't work for me because you're in Cruise's eyes.
Here is a guy who is looking at stuff, and you can't see what he's looking at, and it seems wrong.
There's something not right about it.
You get it intellectually, but it has no cinematic or emotional force, which is what he's built through all the way up to the film for an hour and 20 minutes.
Audiences, it's an aesthetic flaw.
It's a flaw, and it does not correspond with Cruise's natural curiosity to go around the implanted figures to see what's going on.
Nor does it make the film more moral, or I think more acceptable. It's you can see what's kind of happening, and you know it's there.
It's dirtier. It's dirtier to have it half glimpsed than to go ahead and see it.
What you imagine is always worse than what you actually see.
From a dream into an annoying nightmare.
Okay. And now a movie coming up on cable. Stanley Kubrick was the most private of filmmakers, hardly ever granting interviews, so a new documentary about his life and work is of special interest. It's called Stanley Kubrick, A Life in Pictures. It debuts June 12th on Cinemax. and it will be part of a Kubrick collection that will be released the same day on DVD and video. It was produced by Kubrick's brother-in-law, Jan Harlan, who was the executive producer of his last 4 films. Harlan has access to rare family footage.
Nobody ever accuses him of being playful.
Well, he was playful like on the Addams Family, kind of playful.
Very little footage exists of Kubrick at work, but we do see what's available. Here he is on Full Metal Jacket. Fellow directors like Sidney Pollack, Woody Allen, and Steven Spielberg speculate about their brilliant colleague.
As a filmmaker, you know, for me, he was a conceptual illustrator of the human condition.
Stanley Kubrick was a grand master, a perfectionist who made extraordinary demands on his casts and crews. His work excited intense interest among film lovers, and the documentary covers all of his films, plus legendary projects that were never made, like Napoleon, The Aryan Papers, and AI, which was taken over by Spielberg and comes out later this summer. AI was in development for years by the legendary director Stanley Kubrick, who passed it on to Steven Spielberg, but still gets a credit and a dedication. In the future, global warming has flooded many cities, but the United States still prospers thanks to its lead in developing intelligent robots called mechas. Frances O'Connor and Sam Robards play a couple whose son is in a coma. The husband brings home a cute little mecha named David as a consolation, but at first, his wife is enraged.
I'll return him to Cybertronics first thing in the morning. It's gone.
Good. I mean, Henry, did you see his face? He's so real. But he's not.
No, he's not.
David is played by Haley Joel Osment from The Sixth Sense, who proves once again he's one of the best young actors in movie history. Little David looks real, but he's a machine inside, and yet he desperately wants to belong. David has read Pinocchio, and he thinks that somewhere there's a blue fairy who will transform him into a real boy. He goes on a quest with Joe, a gigolo mecha, played by Jude Law.
Is Blue Fairy mecha, ogre, man, or woman?
Woman.
Woman. I know women. They sometimes ask for me by name.
It's uncanny the way AI mirrors the structure of Kubrick's famous 2001. Man invents a new tool, the tool makes a visionary journey possible, and then mysterious creatures create a familiar environment to study the traveler, who in this case is the tool instead of the tool's makers. The film is filled with visual wonders and astonishing special effects. I'm giving it a thumbs up for sure, and yet somehow AI, like David, doesn't have a heart. It wants us to care about a character who is essentially, let's face it, just a computer program. The test of any artificial intelligence is when the computer convinces you it's human. When David spends 2,000 years on hold, I was looking at a computer glitch, not a little boy.
Well, I like this movie a lot, but I think the problem is that it tries to have a heart when it shouldn't. To be more honest, probably to Kubrick's original vision, and I think Spielberg does try to respect that. There's a certain chilliness and starkness to the story. But not without, you know, I don't want to give away too much here, but then he has to go for that golden glow moment at the end, toward the end, and I thought...
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, because Kubrick, I think, would have been a little more astringent. He was sometimes charged with not having a heart in his movies, that it was all brain, but I think in this case, what we're talking about is an artificial brain, and there's a little bit of a problem in the fact that this little boy isn't a real little boy, and he's never going to be a little boy. And we know that, and he doesn't, and so we're not on the same page.
There are moments early on where I thought this might be like a horror movie on the level of The Shining, that this kid wasn't quite wired in the right way and that he was going to go psycho, and that might have been interesting as well. But there was a moment in this movie where it should have ended, and it didn't, and it kept going, and I thought that diminished it. Also, there's some inconsistencies with the characters. I mean, the little boy is supposed to be the only one of these mechas who has the ability to love, but the other ones do seem to have a lot of emotions. Jude Law, his character of Joe, doesn't have that love imprint, but he does seem to have the cynicism microchip.
They made us too smart, too quick, and too many.
This is a wild movie. There are some frightening scenes in here and some, as you mentioned, some great visuals. I mean, some of the best effects I've ever seen where we see something like New York City half underwater, and it really looks like New York City's underwater.
You know, I want to go back a little bit to what you said about the end of the movie. I think it kind of goes off the track a little bit with that strange fantasy about his hang up with the Blue Fairy, and yet I don't want to get hung up on that because this is a movie that has some amazing things in it. And as I was sitting there was a time, maybe at about the hour-and-a-half mark, when I thought this is the best movie of the year.
Right.
I think that maybe, you know, it should have been a little more true to its original impetus and not try to get into the sentimental stuff, but still.
Our disappointment is based on...
It's a very good movie.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that I think we're both a little bit disappointed, but we like it a lot, is because we thought it could have been a masterpiece.
The late Stanley Kubrick worked for 15 years on AI and then shared his vision with Steven Spielberg. He wrote and directed this film, infusing it with probably more sentimentality than Kubrick would have found in this message of men, machines, and machines that are almost men. The story is set in a futurescape where global warming has drowned the coastlines. Survival depends on population limits. Robots called mechas take the place of humans in the workforce, and technology is racing out of control. William Hurt plays a professor with a startling plan to create a robot child programmed to love its owner. A couple whose sick child has been frozen until he can be cured adds a robot to their empty nest. Haley Joel Osment is outstanding as the eerily disarming mecha boy hardwired to love on command. David is eventually abandoned in the woods by his family. He meets up with Gigolo Joe, a love mecha now reduced to hustling. He expresses the bitter truth about the mecha fate.
And you are alone now only because they tired of you.
The story of David is the real heart of this movie, but you know, I think that's the problem, because David, after all, no matter how cute he is, no matter that he is played by Haley Joel Osment, is nevertheless a robot and not a real little boy. The humans in this movie are his family. These people who bring him home, who invest in him, who love him, and then abandon him. What is their story? What is their motivation? I think that's maybe where Spielberg should have focused. Nevertheless, AI is a wondrous movie to behold with incredible special effects. It's a good movie. I'm recommending it. I give it 3 stars. Kubrick was called a recluse, but we glimpse his warm and lively family life and his friends who gathered often on his estate outside of London, where he prepared his films one meticulous shot at a time. Since Kubrick never publicly revealed his secrets or analyzed his thoughts, this is a valuable portrait of a great man. It plays June 12th on Cinemax.
Well, I found it ironic and disappointing that such a brilliant, groundbreaking filmmaker would be the subject of such a plodding, straightforward documentary that goes on and on and on. It's too long, for one thing, and that's what I found disappointing. And maybe because there isn't a lot of footage available, there's nothing new there. And yeah, they have access to a lot of things, and some of that's interesting, but the talking heads are not saying anything that tells me anything new about
I think they're saying a lot of interesting
Kubrick.
stuff. For example, Woody Allen had to see 2001 3 times before he realized that he liked it. But I think that people are so hungry for information about Kubrick that I'm very happy that all of this stuff is in there.
That's fine.
I think it more or less contains the sum total of everything they could find about this man.
But Roger, as a documentary, does that make it an effective piece of filmmaking? No, they just throw everything out there. So yes, he's a fascinating guy.
Would you rather have seen it or not have seen it?
I would rather it would be an hour and a half instead of 2.5 hours. And as a documentary, I can't recommend it.
I don't want to give up a single moment of it because I want to know about that information.
Well, because you're a huge fan of Kubrick's, and that's great. If people love his work, they might want to see this.
But if you're not a fan of Kubrick's, who's going to watch it anyway?
Well, then you can say that about any movie. I don't think it's an effective piece of filmmaking in and of itself.
Okay. Jonathan, what's the first attribute you think of when you think of Stanley Kubrick?
I think of intelligence. It's funny, I often think of each of his films as being like about the inside of a brain, about a system that sort of starts working and then starts breaking down. And you know, people often say he was cold, but for me, it's just that what's difficult is that the emotions are twisted, so you have to like follow them through a maze. But they're never cold. They're just elusive.
Michael.
Well, I think of 2 words that keep popping up in his titles: fear and desire, killer's kiss, strange love, that kind of tension that you see in all his films between love and death, sex and murder, between the two, the creative side of life and the destructive side of life. He was He was a filmmaker who was a great perfectionist, who was a master of images and a master of a certain kind of exaggerated performance style. But he also dealt with very large issues. He grappled with the eternal. He was not a simplistic or simple director. And that's one of the best things about him.
Dan.
Stanley Kubrick has been called the Howard Hughes of cinema because he was such a recluse. I prefer to think of him as the Frank Sinatra of cinema because he always did everything his way. I mean, let's face it, here's a guy who would be tirelessly putting together the thing the way he wanted to. Nobody interfered with him. You can go back to any Kubrick film and feel rebirth, regenerated, because here you're in the presence of somebody who genuinely stood for what the heart and the soul of the cinematic art really was.
Ray?
In relating to Kubrick's heart and mind, I think of the quote from his collaborator Michael Herr, who co-wrote Full Metal Jacket, who said that merciless is not the same as pitiless. But I would also think about his painstaking preparations he would make to prevent a movie from divulging all its secrets on a single viewing. These are films that need to be seen a few times before you start really getting at the nice, smart things underneath.
He made very complex films. You know, when you called him the Frank Sinatra of cinema because he did things his way, in a way, he kind of represented something to all of us because he was over there on his estate in England. He was far from Hollywood. He owned his own cameras, his own editing equipment, his own sound, and he worked entirely according to his own schedule. It's kind of inspiring at a time when everybody else seems to be marching to the drums of commerce and promotion.
Or when young screenwriters are being taught that 12 weeks is too long to spend on crafting a screenplay.
He'd spend 12 weeks on a single scene if he needed to. Yeah. Michael?
Well, he believed in movie making as an art, and he was not ashamed to call himself an artist. And he was a proud perfectionist, someone who really wanted to get it right. His legend was of the guy who would shoot not just 20 or 30 takes, but 50 takes, 60 takes, 100 takes, who would keep on going and put his actors through grueling paces until they got it right, until they got it perfectly, until they got the art and the power and the passion that he wanted.
Yeah, but at the same time, he was really a kind of like experimental, personal filmmaker, which I think, and in fact, he represents one of the rare cases in film history where there's a meeting point between this kind of tradition of the small, personal, experimental film and the big studio film as well. He somehow managed to put them together.
And something else Michael said, which was interesting in looking at the contrast between Killer and Kiss, or Fear and Desire, or for that matter, Clockwork and Orange, the organic and the machine. The titles themselves show a contrast between the controlling idea and the organic idea.
The key to his success as a filmmaker in a collaborative sense, not just the auteur sense, is that he was the ruthless general everyone wanted to march with. He got everyone on his side, and no matter what happened, he expected his cast and crew to keep up with his standards.
Yet he was able to inspire a lot of loyalty, so that somebody like Cruise was able to take 3 years out of his career to make this film and still speak fondly about it.
He was a general that people were willing to take army pay from, basically.
But you know, I think the press has given him a bad rep when they keep, I mean, everybody talks about him being asocial and a recluse. He didn't like to talk to the press, but he had friends, he was a family man, he communicated with people all the time.
And I want to go around the table and ask you guys which one you would recommend and what people should look for. Ray?
I would say the Steadicam rushing through the corridors, the haunted hotel, and The Shining.
Dan?
Roger, I was a teenager traumatized by the X-rated Clockwork Orange.
Jonathan Rosenbaum.
Well, I think I'd recommend The Killing, specifically for all these wonderful noir actors.
That car arrives about 5 o'clock and parks directly in front of the main entrance to the clubhouse. 2 men stay in it. One at the wheel, the other at a machine gun in the turret.
Michael Wilmington.
A must-see for movie lovers is the great visionary science fiction epic 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that wonderful way that he lyricizes technology in the Blue Danube docking scene.
And as for myself, I just looked at Dr. Strangelove again last week. It's a comedy that holds up and still has its satiric edge after all these years. And the thing I liked best about it this time was George C. Scott's facial expressions in the war room.
Now, it appears that the order called for the planes to attack their targets inside Russia.
Thanks very much, guys, for joining me today. I think it was a good discussion. We give it 5 Positive votes, 5 people like the movie. All of us want to see it again before we write our review.